The memory of that winter night is etched into me, a permanent scar on my peace of mind. It started like any other evening, but it curdled into the single most terrifying experience of my life, a fear that still claws me out of sleep, heart hammering against my ribs. I'd put in a brutal day at work, the kind that leaves your mind numb. All I wanted was to shut everything out. I got home, wrapped myself in a heavy blanket and turned on the TV, finally allowing the fatigue I'd held back all day to crash over me. My home is a small, modest place in a quiet neighborhood full of families, so the evenings are usually still and peaceful. But outside, a storm was unleashing its fury, wind howling around the corners of the house, thunder grumbling in the distance. As the day's tension finally eased, my eyes grew heavy. Then the power died. The TV blinked off and the room plunged into absolute darkness. My first thought was the storm. These outages happen sometimes in winter. But when I went to the window, a cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The lights were on in all my neighbors' houses. Across the street, a porch light glowed. A warm, yellow light shone from a kitchen window next door. Only my house was dark. I tried to dismiss it, a fluke, a problem with the line just to my house. I switched on my phone's flashlight and decided to check the basement. The stairs creaked under my feet and the damp, earthy smell hit me. Basements have always frightened me, the shadows, the silence, the unknown. That old childhood fear returned instantly, even here in my own home. I shone the light on the fuse box. All the switches were up. Nothing was tripped. No smell of burning. Everything looked perfectly normal. Just as I was thinking it was just a glitch, I heard it. A sound from above. A faint creak like a door moving. Then, soft, unmistakable footsteps on the wooden floor upstairs. My blood ran cold. My entire body froze. This was no outage. I gripped my phone tighter, my hand trembling. The footsteps weren't heavy, but they were clear. Someone was up there. I crept back up the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The hallway looked empty at first glance, but when I swept my light across the floor, I saw them. Wet footprints, streaked with mud. Every bit of hope I had vanished. I was not alone. The footprints crossed the living room and continued down the hall. The mud was still wet. They were fresh, made only minutes ago. My throat tightened, making it hard to breathe. Goosebumps prickled across my skin. I followed the tracks, moving slowly. With each step, my ears rang and my heartbeat seemed to echo in the silent house. The storm outside felt distant now, as if the whole world had stopped to listen to the silence inside. The trail led to my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and from inside came a soft, steady sound, breathing. That simple human sound was the most horrifying proof. Someone was in there, standing in the dark. I tightened my grip on the phone, my fingers clenched into a fist. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to convince myself I was wrong, that it was my own breathing, my mind playing tricks. But the wet, muddy footprints on the floor told the undeniable truth. I held my breath and in one quick movement, shoved the door open. The light from my phone flooded the room. And our eyes met. A stranger stood by my bed looking straight at me. He held a rusty screwdriver in his hand. When the light hit his face, he froze. He said nothing. His eyes were dull and cold, showing no emotion except for the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Time stopped. That second felt like an hour. Then he moved. Suddenly, with a speed I didn't expect, he lunged for the window. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. He flung the window open, the frame groaning in protest. A blast of cold air rushed in, and a second later he leapt out into the night. The window clattered, the sound mixing with the howling wind. I stood rooted to the spot, listening to his footsteps fade away. My phone shook in my hand as I peered out the window. The street was empty. Rain hit the glass. The wind screamed. He was gone. I didn't know what to do. The only thought in my head was to call the police. My voice shook as I told them what happened. They arrived within minutes. There were still wet marks inside, fingerprints on the windowsill. As they inspected, an officer shouted from outside. The cover of the external electrical box was open. The wires inside had been torn apart, deliberately tampered with. My heart dropped. The stranger had cut the power before coming inside. He had done it on purpose, to give himself the advantage of darkness. The police took my statement and searched the area, but they found nothing. No camera footage, no witnesses. The man had vanished into the storm. I wasn't hurt that night, but facing that stranger, seeing that empty stare, feeling the cold certainty of his intention, it became my deepest fear. Even now, when the lights flicker or the wind rattles the door, my heart races in the exact same way. The same thought always crosses my mind. What if he hadn't run? I can't forget that night. I was alone in a small cabin in the mountains, a place where no one ever came. I had wanted to escape the city and clear my mind, to find a little solitude and silence. But it was then I realized how heavy it feels to be truly alone in the middle of nature. After a while, even your own breathing sounds too loud. The rain hadn't stopped since morning, pounding rhythmically on the roof as if it wanted to shake the cabin apart. The crackle of the fireplace was my only comfort, but eventually, my eyes grew heavy and I fell asleep on the couch. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up close to midnight. The rain was falling harder now, mixed with a wind that created an ominous roar around the cabin. At first I just listened, but then another sound mingled with the storm, the faint creaking of wooden steps. I told myself it was the wind, the cabin was old, the storm was fierce, noises were normal. I clung to that logical explanation. But a few minutes later the creak came again, sharper and closer this time. I slowly turned my head toward the door. Behind the curtain I could see nothing but the blurred shadows of rain. Still, a tightness spread through my chest. I grabbed my phone. No signal. In that moment, I felt the profound weight of being entirely alone. "You're imagining things," I whispered to myself. "You're overreacting." I decided to go to the kitchen and make something warm. I stood up and took a few steps. Then a shadow passed behind the fogged window. Outside, a face was pressed against the glass. A flash of lightning lit up the night, and in that instant I saw the faint outline of a face. I swear I saw its eyes staring right at me. My blood froze. I couldn't move. I could only hear my own breath racing. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow vanished. I tried to gather myself and stepped toward the door. Maybe someone needed help. Maybe they were lost. But the second I moved, a sharp, cracking sound came from the other side of the window. Panic hit me. I ran into my room and shut the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the lock, but it was old and didn't seem to catch. The hallway outside was dark, the cabin lit only by the faint glow of the fireplace. But then another sound joined the storm, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the cabin. It sounded like someone walking on the wooden floor in wet boots. The dim light seeping under the door suddenly began to fade, as if someone was standing right outside, blocking it. I held my breath, my chest tightening. Then the doorknob began to turn, slowly. As it turned, I couldn't hold back the fear building in my throat. It felt like time had stopped. For a second, I believed even the sound of my breathing would give me away. The latch rattled. If it turned a little more, the door would open. Silently praying, forcing myself not to move, I watched as the handle slowly returned to its place. Relief barely touched me before it began to turn again, this time harder. The door shook. Instinct took over. I ran to the window, felt the glass. It was locked. Without thinking, I slammed my fist against it with all my strength. The glass shattered, shards scattering everywhere. Cold rain and wind poured in. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself outside. My knees sank into the mud. Rain lashed my face. My heart hammered against my ribs. Inside the cabin, something fell over with a heavy crash, as though someone was moving through the room. But I didn't look back. I forced myself up and started running into the storm. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the roar of rain seemed distant, but the wind chased me. At times, it felt like footsteps followed mine, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Eventually, I was out of breath. My legs felt heavy. I collapsed beside a rock, sinking into the mud as rain washed over my face. All I could do was stare into the darkness where the cabin lay hidden. And then I heard it, a sound from the cabin, Not footsteps, but a muffled moan, a deep, inhuman roar. It was like a voice, but not from a throat, something deeper, as if it rose from the ground itself. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. The rain had stopped. The forest was silent. Mud caked my clothes, cuts covered my hands. Shivering, I pushed myself up and walked back toward the cabin. The door stood open. Inside, the fireplace still smoldered, but the place was a wreck. An overturned chair, shards of glass, water-soaked boards. Muddy tracks led into the room only to vanish. And worst of all, on the window behind the fireplace, huge muddy handprints were still pressed against the glass. Hands shaking, I called the police. They arrived hours later. I told them everything, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. There were no footprints on the porch steps. The rain had washed them clean. But they saw the handprints on the window. They looked at each other in silence. I don't know if they kept something from me. All I know is I left that place and never returned.